Hello, everyone. Welcome to Onyx Path Con 2022, the Realms of Pugmire Panel. I am Travis Legge, he, they. I will be the moderator, MC, and question asker person on this panel.
Is that technical title, Taskerator?
The askerator, yes.
Get the grand Taskerator.
And I am joined by the amazing Dixie Cochran and the wonderful Eddy Webb. I was trying to do some alliteration and lost them both at the same time. It's late on a Saturday, y'all. We've had a day. But
the dynamic Dixie Cochran.
the dynamic Dixie Cochran.
I kept trying to get Rich to refer to me in the media notes as like diabolical or devious or something, and he keeps going with dynamic, and I'm like, no, I want to be mean. I want to sound meaner than I am.
I love it.
I mean, I think you're very fierce.
Speaking of your fierceness, that's a good segue in Pugmire, right? We've come to talk about Pugmire. For those of you who may not be aware, Pugmire is the OGL 5e adjacent anthropomorphic animal far future fantasy game, right? That's a good way of putting a ribbon on it.
I was just thinking of the awkwardness from the Crossroad Continents panel. So it's the OGL based future fantasy anthropomorphic game based off of the derivation of the world's most popular fantasy game, currently its 5th edition.
We are going to have the longest euphemism for.
It's the Exalted book now.
Yes.
Exalted books have like 5-word titles. I don't know what you're talking about right now.
Well, this is all subtitles, so it'll still just be like Pugmire, but then
right,
just like a whole wall of text underneath. You just see like a cat's ear sticking out. That's the new cover art.
The whole cover. It's just words. It goes around the back. It's amazing.
So now that we're about 5 minutes into the panel and haven't had any actual information, why don't we start with what's news in the realms of Pugmire? Eddy, please, if you could let us know. What's news?
It's a lot. Something I was realizing as we were preparing for this convention, because Rich has been talking a lot about it. It's been 10 years since Onyx Path was formed, and 5 years since Story Path has been out in the world, and I realized it's actually been about 5 years since the Kickstarter for Realms of Pugmire. And it's a bit longer if you count the early access that came out for it.
Yep.
We were announcing Pugmire initially in 2015. So it's been a while, and a lot has happened. But kind of like Pugmire news that's most recent. The obvious one is Squeaks to Deep went live, which makes us, of course, all very, very happy. That is our source book of mice and rats that are psychic. So if you want to play rodents that are living underneath the earth of the Realms of Pugmire, that's your source book to do it. It's kind of our mega dungeon-ish inspired book. And also, the fact that it uses psychic powers instead of magic is something I've always kind of wanted to do, because I remember being one of the 5 people that actually liked psionics in Dark Sun and 2nd edition AD&D. So
I like psionics in general. I've never disliked psionics.
Yeah, it's partially because also my wife Michelle, who it is amazing because everyone sees us and it's like, oh, you must love tolerate your husband playing D&D, and she's like, I was playing D&D long before he was. So she's like OG, like she played like blue box D&D, so she's into it.
That is
and she also
like a weird sexist thing that people still throw around sometimes in the
year
2022. They're like, oh, did your boyfriend drag you here? And I'm like, no, go away.
And it's even funnier, with digression, but it's even funnier when we'll bring up wrestling, and it's like going, oh, your husband likes wrestling. Do you watch it with him? And he's like, I got him into it. What are you talking about? And I tell him who Ric Flair was. What are you talking about?
I still think that when I go to punk concerts with my boyfriend, people assume that he is the one there to see the punk show, and I'm like, are you looking at me?
Hair.
Have you seen me? Like I have introduced him to this band. Like
Yes. Right. So Squeaks and Deep, right? The thing we're here talking about. That was kind of our last big source book for Pugmire.
Yeah.
So got to introduce more playable species into Pugmire, which is awesome. From that, we also got a stretch goal for the Squeaks and Deep Companion, which is not out yet. That's still in process. I teased a little bit of that yesterday in the Pugmire game we had on Friday night. They got to meet up with the underground city of Azure Sky, which was a village of rabbits and hare with a dark secret herbing in. But so it has more underground bits like monsters and settings and components that you can add to your Squeaks and Deep adventure. And also does have for playable rabbits and hares. So it ain't another species that's playable in Pugmire.
Bunnies.
Yes, bunnies.
Bunny people.
Aside from that, and some people don't realize this, but unlike a lot of the Onyx Path games generally fall in two categories: either something that Onyx Path owns, i.e., Rich directly has control over it, or it's something that's licensed from an outside party, like a lot of our World of Darkness, like Chronicle Darkness books. This is something that's creator owned. Specifically, I own the rights to Pugmire, and Rich and I have a very specific legal agreement, which I will not be going into details of here, but suffice to say is that I can go off and make other Pugmire projects that don't necessarily involve Onyx Path, as long as they're not RPGs, because Onyx Path has the exclusive license for that. So I did do an interactive novel late last year with Choice of Games. It is a 100,000 word novel that you can actually play on your phone, and you make choices like a choose your adventure, but the game actually remembers all of your choices.
It's really fun. I played it.
Did you actually finish it?
I didn't finish it, but I've been working on it, and I really should go finish it because I was really enjoying it.
Fair enough. But I won't tell you, I won't spoil some in, but there's a couple of cameos I think you might appreciate in that.
Okay.
But it was actually inspired by, because I read while we were working on Pirates of Pugmire. So it's very much a pirate adventure. You go off and you go after the cat pirate Greedy Bow and track him down. And also our at I blanked the name. Sorry, it's Josh Heath's company. They have announced that they're making a High Level Games. Thank you. I was like high something games. Like the middle word was escaping me. It's late on Saturday, folks. And they announced they're doing a Monarchies of Mal board game. Actually, that is a joint license with me and Onyx Path. And they haven't announced too many details of that yet, but that is coming in the future.
I'm not sure I actually knew about that until right now. So thank you for telling me about the Monarchies of Mal board game.
Yes, it was something that was they made an announcement on Facebook like a few months back, and so Rich and I kind of worked the workshop the announcement, and then it was announced, and I think that was the last thing that was kind of mentioned because they were like, "Hey, we're doing this." So it's still early days, but that is certainly something that is worth talking about in this panel. So I think there are other things outside of just the role-playing game that are happening, and there are lots of other things that I can't talk about, but are in various discussions, both involving Onyx Path and also other avenues that are really, really exciting.
And like some things I know about and some things I don't. And that's great. Like that's one of the cool things about how our licensing works. And also just, I mean, there's stuff like, yes, we're a pretty small company. There aren't that many of us, but there are some things that I just don't need to know. And I was talking about this during the Banana Group panel because I like that because that means I get to be excited when I see it. It is fun to actively be excited by the company that you work for and be like, oh, cool, I didn't know about that part of it, you know?
Right, yeah.
Like there's some stuff that's going to be discussed in tomorrow's Pathcast Live that I'm kind of fresh to. That's great.
To be fair, I am too. I know that thing's happening. I know a little bit about it, but otherwise it's like, could be a surprise.
But yeah, no, that's awesome. And I love the stuff that we've been putting out for Realms of Pugmire the past few years here. Like, I know that it wasn't the biggest Kickstarter we've ever done, but I love Pirates of Pugmire. I love what it added to the game. Not just in terms of, ship battles and pirates, but also in terms of species and new callings. And I'm also a huge fan of the callings and Squeaks in the Deep and how those worked out just as fun callings. And once again, it's one of those things where like if you want to mash them together, you can. Like technically, only mice have psionics, but if you really want to play a psionic lizard, like I'm not gonna come to your house and stop you.
Right.
We had to cut back after COVID. We had to cut the budget for the show up at your house and take your books.
Yeah,
it's true. It's true.
The NDA ninjas have really, programs has gone to hell in the past 2 years.
It's not
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, like I ran it for some of my friends a while back. Some folks who were newish to D&D in general, and so had not played Pugmire. They were pretty much all D&D. And one of my friends wanted to play a lizard, and he specifically wanted to play a lizard who could climb on walls. And I was like, well, it's not actually a power, but there is a spider walking power, and I can just give it to you, so you always have it on.
Right.
Because he wanted to play a gecko, so he could do like the little wall crawling thing. And it never actually came up in play. He just wanted it, so I gave it to him. I wrote him a neck. And the fact that like I enjoy homebrewing for Pugmire is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, because you don't really do that.
I don't do a lot of mechanic work. Eddy is the person who forced me into doing mechanics work. Because I said, I want to write a Pugmire. I'm mostly a setting person. And Eddy said, cool, write character creation. And I'm like, but that has numbers in it. And then I wrote that for Pirates and for Squeaks and had a really good time. And obviously, Eddy's great to work for. Your red lines are always fantastic as far as like tweak this, tweak that. Having other people who are more mechanical go through and look at it is great because making these books is a very collaborative process. Because I'm always sitting here going like, I don't know if this should do 1d4 or 1d6 damage. I don't know what this should do. Like, please help me out. I can fudge it, but having somebody there to be like, oh, it should do this.
And actually, that's a good kind of segue, because both of you worked on Squeaks. So I mean, like, obviously, from a producer developer standpoint, I know what y'all did, how I did it, but I mean,
yeah.
What was it like actually, now that it's all said and done, working on the callings specifically? Because like you said, I pushed you into that, but also I knew that was more setting building than perhaps I think you initially thought it would be.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things with psionics and with all characters having it is making sure all the callings are different.
Yeah.
Because it would be real, and also making sure that mice and rats, because their society is very blended as opposed to cats and dogs. Yes, you could probably find a mouse only village, but for the most part, especially in the deep, they all live together. It's a shared society. So for them to have completely separate callings for mice and rats would be a little silly, which is why I say in the book that you can take anybody else's calling, it's fine.
Right.
And that you can learn things from other places because that's how their society functions. They're a lot more honestly socialist than the cats or dogs are. And I wanted to reflect that in their actual callings. So I think that we hammered out some stuff. I had a few suggestions, you had suggestions, and I like where it all landed in the end. I've played my mouse Rascal a couple times, obviously, and he's a lot of fun. He's very big on barging into doors and just doing whatever he wants to do.
Right. He just thinks he's invulnerable.
Laszlo? Yeah, of course he does. And I like that we were able to play with the level of psionics everybody had to really make it make sense. It's kind of like how a ranger can cast spells in D&D, but a wizard can only cast spells, really.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing with psionics. Like, all of them can have it. Most of them do have some kind of psionics, but like how often they use it or what they use it for is really where it makes them distinct. Because some of them use it like a sorcerer, where that's all of their offense, all of their defense, healing, anything. And then some of them have it, like I said, more like a ranger has certain spells, where like they might use it to track something or to like make their physical attack stronger, etc. I also love that you put tells in as a thing that we should throw out there, because that means that it gives mice and rats more of a reason to live underground, because they don't necessarily want the public at large to know that they have this special magic that nobody else has. And I also love all the background reasons behind it, because Pugmire is just so well thought out and it makes me happy. Like every time that I ask Eddy for a background thing for like even just his headcanon, he always has a satisfying answer for me, and that makes me happy, because like a lot of times you see settings, I feel like you can see the difference between a setting that somebody put a lot of thought into and one that someone just thought would be a cool idea, you know. And the ones that have a lot of thought put into them are the ones that tend to draw people in. And I feel like Pugmire is one of those things that, like, on the surface, people always look at it and they're like, oh, D&D with dogs, right?
Yep.
D&D with dogs, D&D with cats, is it whatever. And yes, that is true. It is that. But it is also like this amazing futuristic, nostalgic society that is searching for meaning and searching for their origin and trying to build accords with other species and trying to figure out how to live together. And they don't know their history as much as even we do as humans, you know? And that's fascinating to me. And I've never gotten to like run or play a super long game set in the realms, but I would love to, because I would love to dig into that. Like I really want to dig into like some of the metaphysical questions of their universe with players who don't know the answers.
Right.
Because I do know the answers. not to everything, because some things have no answer.
Right. You know all the answers to the answers that thing have answers for. Yes.
Yes. And I just really, really like love that about the setting. Like when we talked to like Squeaks was so carefully thought out. And yeah, it sounds cute. It's called Squeaks in the Deep. But like it's there's so much thought that went into it. We talked a lot about the concept of a diaspora. We went into it. We wanted to make sure that there weren't any racial connotations, because rats have been a stand-in for certain negative connotations in the past.
Yep.
And so we wanted to make sure to completely avoid that. Which is why we subverted shinies entirely.
Yeah.
Which I was really pleased with that. That was one of my ideas that I was super happy with.
No, that was definitely because I knew that was a problem and I was struggling to find a way around it.
But yeah, so like there's just so much about them that I love, and I just feel like a lot of love went into mice and rats because they've always kind of been the underdogs in the Pugmire setting. I mean, in the original The Rat King adventure that you're dealing with, they're trying to rise up. They're trying to rise up and get treated better, and they're not doing a great job. And I think over the past couple of years, a lot of us identify with the rats and mice a little more.
Yeah, I'll say it has become relevant.
Yeah, and I think I think that's something that just as society has shifted a little bit, maybe I'm getting too philosophical about Pugmire, I don't know, but
it happens.
But it makes me happy to think about that like people have gone from, you know, just wanting to play like the best friends and the kitty cats to wanting to play the, you know, tiny squeakers who want to rise up. Well, they're not squeakers, but, you know, who want to rise up and have a better life.
Absolutely.
Well, and that was one of the things that was just, it's a lot of fun about Squeaks in the Deep, both to work on, I think, but also probably to engage, I would imagine, to engage with just at your table or as a fan, is there is that very surface level of like, oh, you know, spooky Underdark stuff. Oh, you know, cute rats with, you know, psi powers. But you can get super serious, super dark, and super, you know, just impactful with that book in a real hurry, or you can not. Like those are both perfectly valid options that are well supported, I think, with what's in that text. And that was super cool to see come together.
It's also got parts where it can be really creepy, which I love. Like I was not prepared for the baby pede when we were playing the first time. There was like a terrifying centipede made of plastic baby heads attacking me. And for all the plastic is very valuable, I did not want to stay there any longer because there's a scary thing happening. So yeah, no, it's a great setting, and I love the idea that we've incorporated this like marginalized community of a diaspora who are pretty much all refugees with the idea of the mega dungeon, because those two things usually don't go together in a campaign. Usually it's like either you're doing the political marginalization kind of like dealing with society campaign, or you're doing a mega dungeon.
Right.
And we're like, no, what if we just, you know, two great tastes that taste great together?
Yeah, because I mean I respect the mega dungeon style. That's one of the reasons why I did it, is because I felt like it was a piece of D&D play style that doesn't get much play nowadays that could stand a reinvention. But you're right. Part of classic mega dungeon gameplay is open a room, it's empty. Open a room, it's empty. Open a room, it's a goblin. Open a room, it kills you. You know, I mean, it's just purely mechanical. And I was like, we could put some texture in here. And so by adding that political layer, I'm happy to see that it's resonating well, it seems. But you're talking about thinking through the world building and whatnot, and it leads me to kind of talk Travis a bit, because I had hired you to do the psionic powers. And do you want to relate how the conversation went? Because I basically started off with, I don't know how this works. Do you have an idea?
Right. And I was like, I have a psi system I wrote.
Yeah. Here you go.
It's
Travis pre-did the work.
Right. So I have a Patreon, which, like everything, it's my name, but like everything online. But each month I do like a Patreon exclusive release, and once in a while I bundle those together. And so I had done like a psionics thing a while back for that. That I thought when I pitched that in response to, well, what do you think of psionics? I thought that was going to be like a nice starting point. And there's a lot of stuff, interestingly enough, there's a lot of stuff in that initial psi system's DNA that was drawn from Trinity D20, from the OGL Trinity version, right?
Right.
And so I thought, like, okay, well, this will be a nice groundwork, but we'll have to do a lot of reworking to make it work. And I was both surprised by how little we had to shift, and the places where the shifts that were made, how vital those shifts were. You know, for example, the tells thing, I may be misremembering, but I think that came up like in red lines.
Yeah, I did.
At one point. And so we came up with this idea of how to take this system and really set it apart. So I feel like if you wanted to, you could grab the psi system as presented in Squeaks in the Deep and pretty much plug it into a 5e game if you wanted to, right? But the thing that really makes it live in the world is the way the tells function. And the idea that being tied, because senses are so central to Pugmire, the way that being tied to, like, oh, well, if you get this condition that knocks out your sense, your powers might stop working because your tell isn't going to be able to work, type of thing.
Yeah.
It was a really cool, like, that bit of note, finding that bit of note, I think, was, for me, the most exciting part of the psi powers, you know. And then there was a bit of terminology discussions we had and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the other thing was basically, let's just rename the names, because, and it was, we had an interesting discussion about trying to dial that in, because my first pass at it was kind of Victorian or science pseudobabble. And then we kind of landed somewhere around Frankenstein in terms of, we want Baroque stuff that sounds scientific to people who have had science explained to them, which is basically where the rats are.
Right.
But I didn't want things that actually sounded sci-fi.
Right.
I wanted things that so you know, it's like somewhere around alchemy language.
Yeah.
And that was actually really the hardest part of converting it, was just trying to get that language nailed down. I mean, we moved some powers around, but I remember that the tell thing was because I think my comment was effective. I was worried that it would become more useful than magic.
Right.
One thing I have learned from hard experience over my lifetime is that power creep is a real thing.
Yes.
And it's very easy to do, because it's like, you know, oh, I've learned so much about design, so I want to apply what I've learned to the new game, and to make the powers more effective and more interesting. But that means that those powers are more effective and more interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
So like when I did Monarchy Zamao, it's I need to make the powers more greedier, as I was thinking. Like, basically, you know, it only affects me. It doesn't really help my friends as much as the dog powers do. And also cats, their median hit points have gone down. They're squishier than dogs, so they're a little more flexible, but also they need that flexibility, because otherwise they're going to, on a long enough tail. Cats, when you're on 10th level, cats are going to be about 20-ish points down compared to a dog. So, you know, they need that extra bump, and that was intentional. And then with mice and rats, it's they, you know, like Dixie was saying, we were talking about the reason why they need to hide underground, and that was kind of like, oh, this is like, if there's always an obvious effect of their power, then they can't just be throwing their powers willy-nilly, because otherwise it's perfectly silence magic that resist magic effects have no counter to. But if it's every time I do just my nosebleeds, pulling the line from Maxwell Lord from DC Comics or whatever. It's like, okay, well, now that's a problem. I can't just do it whenever because people see me. And if we write a society where that's prejudicial, like, people get prejudiced against the use of those because they seem weird and unusual, then it's now we're moving more towards that kind of X-Men underground psychic vibe that I was trying to shoot for. Yeah. So, I mean, it was helpful for me because going, this system's solid. I can now focus on tweaking the mechanics to line up with where Dixie was working on. The society thing was a huge weight off my shoulders because I wasn't having to do that and also make sure the mechanics balanced.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's got big Stranger Things vibes now with the mice, They're like, oh, we can't do this thing in public because people will see it and it'll be
exactly.
weird. I imagine there are mice and rats out there, or possibly even some of the, gray market, like cats and dogs who, for a price will cover up the use of your powers.
Right.
Because, especially in the underneath, especially as you get more into like those spaces where the two places meet.
But yeah, that's fascinating to me, and I had so much fun working on this, and I do love how the side powers turned out. I also love that, as we said, some of them can pull from spell lists, which makes sense because the psychic powers work like spells,
right?
And also the fact that we keep saying, psionics and psychic powers and stuff, but just like in Monarchies and Pugmire, there is no actual magic in the world.
Right.
Which makes me so happy every time that I think about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it actually, someone asked me that recently. It's like, oh, this is basically magic. It's like, from a mechanical perspective, yes. From a large enough scale perspective of the world, also yes. But there's a middle ground. And the analogy I gave is like, we all have cell phones.
Yeah.
And those all work on a certain level. We know how they work. And
Mine
you pick up a cell phone.
folds.
Well, except for your weird folding phone that came from the past and the future simultaneously.
Folding phone.
But the thing is that if you put an iPhone and an Android phone next to each other, they will look very similar and do very similar things, but they are not at all compatible.
I can't use my boyfriend's phone.
Not even close.
I don't understand how it works. I've had an Android for 10 years.
Well, for sure. But I mean, like, if you need to make a phone call,
maybe
you could probably find a button that looks like a receiver, which is a thing that has not existed for 15 years, and put that icon and then put it to your ear and start talking to somebody.
Oh yeah, no, I saw a meme the other day where somebody asked why the save icon was a vending machine with a drink sitting there waiting for you. And if you look at the floppy disk icon, it actually could be read that way.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So...
But yeah, if I showed this to somebody from 1980, they'd be like, what the fuck?
Right.
Like, you can watch all the movies on your phone?
If you get a tricorder or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's actually digression, but that icon thing you just mentioned, that's something I need to keep in my back pocket, because every once in a while I do get people asking the question of, why don't dogs know or cats know more? It's the, why don't they understand our society? And I try to explain, it's like, tell me right now everything you know about Roman society.
Right.
Because that's kind of what we're looking at here. It's like, we know a lot, but when you start digging in, there's a lot of contradictory tales. Most of those tales are basically what a bunch of Romans said happened, which isn't what actually happened.
Also, there are a lot of people right now under the age of 25 who don't know what the save icon is.
Right, and that's the point, is like the fact you can look at that stuff now and go, there's drift in 25 years.
Yeah. I've seen people ask why we call it hanging up the phone.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, because you used to hang it. You used to hang it up.
Yeah. Why is it called dialing? Dial.
Yeah, there's no dial on my phone. So yeah, no, it is really interesting how perspective shifts very quickly. And so if you imagine that these dogs and cats in Pugmire are hundreds, maybe thousands of years removed from whenever the cataclysm happened, because we don't know what happened to man, but they're long enough removed from that they don't know, and they can study things. But also, if you think about the amount of things that we write in our current society on places that won't be accessible in hundreds of years, like it'd probably be difficult for a cat or dog in Pugmire to access the contents of my hard drive, and it would be difficult for them to access a book because most of our papers are going to crumble. And if they don't have a way to charge it, how are they going to use a Kindle? As there are all these things that, like, yes, they might have all these things, but they might not know how to use them, not to be able to use them. And we're also talking about the fact that, like, the old ones who left are far future versions of us.
Right.
So we're not talking our level of tech. We're talking like Trinity Aeon or later levels of tech. So it's tech that would look like magic to us if we saw it, right?
Yep.
So if it looks like magic to us, human beings in 2022, it's going to look like magic to dogs who are in a roughly like 15th, 16th century version of the world, right?
Right. And here's a tidbit I don't share often from a Game Master tip I use often with Pugmire. I don't think I've written this down anywhere. But what I do is I try to stick something that people can kind of figure out what it is from context next to something that makes no goddamn sense. So like, for example, yesterday, the scenario I ran, this bit is not in the supplement. This is how I stitched the pieces I came together.
All right.
They walked through a tunnel. I described the tunnel, and it's like there's a tunnel that's got all this tile, and it's curved, and there's a trench with rust in the bottom. And after a while, they're like, "Oh, is that a subway station?" And I was like, after a while, I told them, "Yeah, you got it, subway station." But the characters don't know that. And like, "Oh no, it's cool." And they're clever because they figured it out.
Yeah.
They open a door, and then there's a town on the other side of that door, an underground complete city, and they're just like, "What?" And I'm like, that's. I think where it works is because like the players go, I know what's going on. I have no idea what's going on.
I think it's something that we often, like, writers get it, but it takes a second sometimes. So I'll have a writer come to me and be like, "Oh, I want to set this in like a decrepit, like, theme park." And I'm like, "Don't make it Disney World, because everyone will know. And also, who knows, Disney World will exist in 800 years when the cataclysm happens." I just call it the cataclysm. It's not an actual term.
Sure, right.
That's what Dixie calls
the
it.
incident.
But
the mishap.
But yeah, like, you've got to think in like Star Trek terms, right?
Yep.
And you've got to think of like, what might they have had in the year 2900. Because we're now in the year, and these aren't canon dates, I'm making things up, but we're now in the year 3900.
Right.
And so, like, that's a completely different way of thinking than thinking modern day, because I find that players and writers tend to go to modern day tech or even slightly vintage tech.
Yeah.
I remember editing the Pugmire anthology, and I got to the like third story that had an iPad in it, and I was like, no.
Yeah.
I'm like, we have to stop. Like, change it. Because yes, an iPad is cool and futuristic, but it won't be in 10 years,
Right.
And so, like, let's think outside the box a lot. And that's something that I try to impress on authors, and I try to impress on players, because when you tell somebody they have to have a spellcasting focus and it's going to be a piece of tech, half the time they're going to go to smartphone, graphing calculator, like, remote control, like something that is almost obsolete already, like a remote control. And I'm like, no, you can make, like, I love in the Darcy Cat books that, like, his staff that shoots fire and shit. I don't know what the fuck that is, but it's cool. Like, and also, who knows if it's supposed to shoot fire? He could be using it wrong. Like,
right.
So yeah, that's where I think a lot of the creativity comes in this game. And it makes me so happy when people really click with it. And go a little deeper than the surface level of like D&D with cats and dogs and mice.
No, I completely agree.
Well,
like rambling because I love Pugmire so much.
Well, the other thing that you can do though with that is like, because at the end of the day, you're crafting this world at your table, and you have the text of the books and the art of the books is really what you have to draw from, and the art really shows that aesthetic. But one of the things, as soon as I started thinking about the technology aspect of it, like the meta level technology aspect of it, combined with the art, one of the things that came to mind for me was there was a Marvel miniseries a while ago called Camelot 3000. That really sort of immediately clicked to me, the idea that you have this futuristic society that still employs an aesthetic that is almost, lockstep with what that time period was, but it's completely different technology. So why wouldn't your magic wand look like a magic wand?
There is.
Yeah.
So I have two things that I like to pull from. One is, of course, looking at things like Wakanda, right?
Yep.
That's a great example of like making it a little bit more magical, a little bit more
Mhm.
techy. Or really anything that Tony Stark uses, because
Yeah.
he's using tech that we don't have.
Right.
My other favorite thing to pull from, though, is actually kind of silly, and it lines up with what you were saying. Do either of you watch Star Trek Lower Decks?
Yes.
I have
So they
not
go to
watched
a
it yet. I
planet.
need to.
This is kind of a one-off joke, so I'm not really spoiling anything. But they go to a planet that was settled by Ren Fair people,
Yes.
and so it's got all the Star Trek tech, but they all are like LARPing a Ren Fair the whole time. And that's all I will say. That isn't a spoiler. But I love stuff like that because it's the same thing. Like they're living in Star Trek universe, right? They're
Right.
living in the canonical Star Trek universe, and they're like, no, we're gonna live in castles and have pubs and like do all this stuff.
Right.
And God knows what society is gonna look like in, once again, 500 to 800 years,
Mhm.
2,000 years. I don't know. And so yeah, that's really up to you and your table as to how weird you want to make it. Because like I've seen a lot of cool Pugmire stuff, but I haven't seen anyone being like, oh, I have this thing that hovers above my hand and makes holograms, and I'm like,
Yep.
you should be able to have that, you know?
Right. One of the inspirations, one of the early inspirations for Pugmire was the Thunder the Barbarian cartoon.
Yeah.
And I had my own moment of that because I watched it when I was a kid. I loved it. I started actually my original business partner, Cynthia Celeste Miller, who I worked on Cartoon Action Hour
I
with.
love Cynthia.
She was a huge fan of Thundar, so reminded me of it. I got back into it for a while. And then kind of tapered off again. And then when I started thinking of Pugmire, I got back, started watching episodes. So I had 3 points of connection with this over the course of several decades.
Mhm.
And I'm watching, and one of the characters' name is Ukla. And you always even hear it said. And then, so I was looking up something online about Ukla, and I saw it read, and I realized, holy crap, it's UCLA.
Mhm.
And that moment of figuring the joke out after decades, and I was like, that was so fun. It's like, I get the gag here because it was never really told.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's the humor I want in my game.
I get that a lot from Dystopia Rising as well, which I know, like,
Yeah.
this is not a DRE panel,
Right.
but every time when I was editing DRE that I got a joke where I was like, oh, I see what they did there, I get really excited. And I do the same thing, like when I'm writing for Pugmire, as you know, Eddy, because you've talked about this with Anima. My ADHD makes me really good at making weird connections.
Yep.
That is one of the few superpowers that it gives me. And so I'm like, okay, they see a mall in the future, and I start like thinking about the different levels of like how they would interpret what this ends up looking like, where it would be at this point, what they would think about it, you know, and then like try to come up with names for it. And we have done that in a lot of the books too, where we've put in some kind of like university, but like we really like hide it under 8 layers of we fucked with the name.
Yep.
Because that's important. Like we want to do that.
And it's I think a lot of my redlining tends to be just trying to obfuscate the joke more. One of them is in Pirates of Pugmire. Someone put in a pirate captain Sparrow named Jack, and I was like, I get the joke here. It's Captain Jack Sparrow, but they then put those pieces together on the page for the player. I'm like, no, we need to
don't do that.
Put more distance between them. So basically, it's one of those you have to give him the name Jack, establish him as a character, and then you meet him a scene later, and then you just explain that he is a pirate captain, and then a little bit later, oh, by the way, he happens to be a sparrow, and then let the players take those 3 pieces, stretch it over time, and go, Captain Jack, you know, because there's nothing better than being the game master, saying something and moving on, and 10 seconds later, a player going,
Yeah, no, I also think that we put a lot of thought into things that people might not even really notice, which is something that I once like. I feel like Pugmire is just such a thoughtful line, and that makes me happy. Because we like one of the things that I've written in Pirates and in Squeaks is naming conventions.
Oh yeah,
and it's important because most cultures have some kind of naming convention, right? And so these are all cultures; they should have a naming convention. And dogs and cats were already done by the time that I saw them, and they made perfect sense. You know, you had the way that your cat houses work, you had the way that your dog families worked. perfect sense. And then we get to lizards, for instance, which we don't have like a specific species of lizard.
Right.
Like they're not, you're not going to be called like Edwin von Gecko.
Right.
But yeah, so like getting to define that was really cool. And then mice was the hard one because we had a bunch of established mouse characters when I came into it, mostly from the Rat King adventure. And I was sitting there just staring at their names going like, what do they have in common? What do they have in common? How can I make this into a naming convention? And so like a lot of diasporas and a lot of refugee cultures, the naming convention is that it's a little weird because they're made of a bunch of different cultures that came together to form a new culture.
Yep.
But also that there is still a naming convention there. And one of my favorite things is that I put in the text that rats and mice tend to avoid names that have S sounds in them because they have trouble with it because of their teeth, which I identify with a lot as a child who grew up with very prominent buck teeth. I truly like identify with that.
Yep.
And then everybody immediately went on to create a character with an S in their name or Z in their name, including me with Laszlo.
Right.
So I like always like a little bit on it because it's Laszlo. He can't quite say it right because his teeth are large.
Because teeth are large. Yep.
But yeah, no, I am.
Similar. You and I had actually a moderately long conversation about lizards. I remember I had said I wanted them to kind of have a Scandinavian naming convention where they have like Thor's son or Thor's daughter. And the one thing that I think you brought up was like, okay, how do we do a gender neutral version of that? And then I think you proposed child with an E at the end.
Yeah.
And so it became, Thor's on it, but like the horse child instead. Chroma child is the example we give.
And it's actually a cool sounding name.
It is.
My main snake is Jesk Everchild because I named them after one of my friends.
Nice.
So Jesk Everchild because Jesk belongs to Ever. And Jesk because I had just watched What We Do in the Shadows and I find her saying Jesk one of the funniest things in the entire universe because she can't conceive of the name Jeff.
Yes.
And so it's like we think about this stuff and I think it's so cool that we do.
Right. And similarly, on Pirates, I know Travis, we had some long talks about some of the rules. Because again, I asked you to help the rules out for Pirates, and I was like, give me some sailing rules. And I gave you a little more guidance on Pirates than on Squeaks, which is basically, I don't know, psychic powers, I guess. But more was like, I knew I wanted certain things, but you actually had some really good thoughts about like how ships degrade and what the different positions on the ship do. How was that experience for you?
Well, thank you. It was interesting because unlike the psionics where I was like, oh, I have that. I had not given the slightest bit of thought to nautical combat. The closest I had come to that was we had recently done the Blood Sea book for Scarred Lands, which has zero to do with actual nautical combat.
I thought it had more to do with it, which I had it in mind when I asked you.
Right, I was like,
Blood Sea, Acid Sea, same difference.
Mutants and stuff in it, but no. But it was very cool to look into because I remember as we were discussing it, the two things we were talking about was the idea of like how to make the nautical combat experience fun for everybody at the table. To make it into a group thing, and that dovetailed very nicely as well into where we set up the rules for the ship's articles, and how that almost to an extent supersedes and replaces the space that alignment would occupy.
Yep.
Like you literally set up like the morality of your pirate crew as part of your articles, and all of that really sort of came out of like the same conversation, which ultimately boiled down to we want to make sure nobody is sitting around twiddling their thumbs when the ship goes into a fight. And so the idea of having each position, and I am in the really real world petrified of water. You would not get me on a boat. So I don't know much about like nautical terminology.
Right.
That makes us extra funny because you like
it's true. You're the anti-Matthew.
And see, what's really funny about this is that I feel like people don't know this about me. So I'm gonna reveal something here. But I grew up with parents who did pirate reenactment. I know fucking everything about
I wish I would have known that at the time. I would have.
Like I've gone to pirate themed camping weekends because I had to because I was 15 and they made me go. So yeah, no, that is so funny to me that it's like we hired the Midwesterner and I'm like I grew up a couple hours from the ocean. I have done a million pirate events. I know a lot about pirates.
Sometimes development's kind of a gamble,
right?
You
get things wind up in strange spots, but
I mean,
no.
It was more, I think, relevant, although, again, probably should ask Dixie if I knew in retrospect, but I mean, I was thinking more pirate fiction than nautical reality.
Right, sure.
And it was interesting because after we did all of that, about the articles and the positions, recently I got a subscription to Shonen Jump Online, which is, by the way, a ridiculous, it's $2 a month to read like
you can read like a million manga.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's amazing. But they have all of One Piece on there, and I was like, I should probably actually read One Piece. I had zero exposure to it all through Pirates of Pugmire. Everyone's like, oh, so it's One Piece. I'm like, I don't know what that means.
They're doing a live action one now on Netflix.
Yes. So I was like, well, I can watch 500 episodes, or I can read 1,000 chapters. I'm like, that's probably faster. And so I've been reading. I've got like a few volumes in now, and I was like, oh, I could see Luffy putting his crew together and all those positions that we talked about, and then like how he reenacts things. I can start to see the articles of that pirate crew forming as they go through their adventures. I'm like, we really nailed that. That's amazing. So
yeah.
It was a very cool process of discovery, and I was very thankful to have that opportunity to stretch my design legs in a way that
totally
I wouldn't normally, but also just the conversations we had during that. The other thing, just in general, working on Pugmire, I love the work that's come out of it, but the experience of the way that those collaborations have come together and the way that those discussions have taken shape. Because also, like, there's again, speaking of things I would never normally write had I not worked on a Pugmire book. Working on the storytelling and diaspora section for Squeaks is not the type of thing I would normally like throw myself on the sword of writing. Like, oh, let me do that one.
I wrote life in the margins, so I understand.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conversation about, how are we going to represent this? What are we going to do about the fact that when the rodents were initially introduced in Pugmire, they were introduced as this villainous, the cult of Labator, and how do we work that into this? It was a very fun kind of growth in that we had some relatively challenging milestones to hit, I guess you could say.
Right, because we had to quietly retcon some stuff, frankly.
Right, and figure out a way to minimize the impact of that retcon. But I think in the finding and in some of those other things, in the tells and the reason why the mice and rats hide their powers and things along those lines, all that sort of came together in a way that I don't know that could have been planned. You know what I mean? As well. Like, some of that was the field, problem solving in the field.
And I'll be honest. That's how I creatively like to work. I like to work not, without a net completely, not with everything completely planned out somewhere in the middle. I like to know, okay, I've got the main points nailed down. How do we fill in the gaps? Because I have learned from working the other side of the development contract that if everything's just laid out for me, I can do it, but then there's not much of me in that process. I'm basically just writing the stuff that you would have written if you had the time.
Right.
So I try to make sure that the team has something they can dig their paws into and kind of play with. You just put the squeaky toy in their mouth and just. So I mean, with Pugmire, that was more me. I kind of just had to put it all down. And then with Monarchies, it was much more, okay, I knew there's a lot of those pieces I needed to put into place. And so there were some small gaps I could fill in. But with Pirates and now Squeaks, it was much more, okay, now we have a body of work that we need to work within.
Right.
And I find working within constraints much more interesting than just do whatever you want or write exactly this.
I also find that every time that I've been on a Pugmire writing project, it's been one of those things where like the Slack is so excited Like everyone is just throwing out ideas like immediately. Like we like get the outline and we're like, what if we did this? What if we did this? How do you feel about this? Eddy, I had an idea. Like, and in that way we are all kind of like puppies when we get excited about it. Because I think everybody that works on Pugmire tends to love Pugmire.
And the energy is always good.
Yeah, and like whether it's because you love the setting specifically, because you love dogs, you love cats, you love whatever. Everyone has had some kind of, creature in their life at some point. And so yeah, like I am just a big fan of the game, and therefore I get to like getting to work on it was a dream. I was a little nervous at first because once again it was my first mechanics assignment. But you were very helpful through all of it. You told me what you wanted. You told me where I could improve things. I think one of the harder things for me to do in Pirates, which was the first one, was the alchemist powers.
Right.
But we talked it through. We figured it out, and then I think in mice and rats, so I think the biggest challenge with those wasn't so much the powers as it was the retconning. Because like you said, we were taking some things back from like the very first Pugmire book, which, but benefit of hindsight. If you look at any Exalted book, we soft retcon things all the time. It's fine. So like figuring out what shinies meant was a big deal. Because we had said definitively in multiple books that rats and mice cared about shinies. That's all they cared about, which makes them sound greedy, which makes them sound like a racial stereotype.
Right.
And so instead, I cast about a lot in my brain and finally was like, what if shinies is like ideas, like bright ideas? You say someone's bright, you say someone's, like...
Yeah, that was so good.
Like, illuminated. Those are both things that mean you're smart, but also are shining. And so mice and rats actually don't really care about plastic. They care about knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. And that was so great, and I love that everybody was on board with it, and it became like a whole thing.
It folded in so well into what was established while still giving us a whole new ground to play with. I've been a terrible moderator and just realized how late in the game we are. So we do have a couple questions I want to ask real quick.
No worries.
Question number one being, will there be books on the Unseen Ages of Man, Badgers, Fearful Forest, or the Cats and Dogs War?
Or Dogs and Cats.
So the short answer is, if there would be, we would have announced it by now. But the slightly longer answer is that I do plan the book schedule out to a degree, but I do it in waves. So initially I pitched Pugmire because I really had no idea if there was going to be anything more than just Pugmire. And then there was, so then it's okay, now we need to get the stuff around Pugmire and then Monarchy. So we planned those like 3 or 4 books outside of those stretch goals. And then we got those done, and then it's okay, now we want to do Pirates. And I had pitched Squeaks to Rich as an idea, and he's like, yeah, let's sit on that, but let's see how Pirates did. And the Pirates did okay. But then Rich was happy to go ahead with Squeaks, so we did Squeaks. So I have ideas for books that may entail some of those topics. I mean, the Fearful Forest, I don't think I'll do a book on the Fearful Forest. I think that kind of stuff would be a great Canis Minor project, is doing something on just the Fearful Forest.
Also, there are a whole lot of monsters that you could just put in the Fearful Forest, and like, they're out there in all the books already. Right.
The one exception is the War of Dog and Cats. I probably will not do anything with that because I'm initially I had ideas for that, but then talking to Ian about her thoughts on the Aberrant War specifically, and how that works so much better if no one knows definitively what actually happens.
Yeah.
It's just a horrible thing we don't talk about anymore.
Kind of like what happened to man. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I think I don't mind like leaving in bits and pieces of what happened during the war, but a book just set during the war, I more and more I think that's not. It's weird for the tone of the book, which is about building bridges. And if anything, if we ever did like say a miniatures game of Pugmire, then I might look at the Dog and Cat War. Like here's your Warhammer game.
So when we eventually do Fire Emblem, Pugmire.
Right. Yeah. And you have 3 houses. You can have dogs, cats, and the pirates.
Something that would be more tactical, that would more lean into that type of story, because that's not the story that Pugmire ultimately tells, right?
No, it's not a war game.
Exactly. So I mean, and there are other ideas I have in mind. Like I said, I have projects I'm working on right now, but I can't talk about. But at the end of the day, there is more Pugmire coming, certainly.
Wait, and the other question being is, forgive me, I'm probably going to mangle this a little bit. The uplifted are usually pets, or are the chosen races based on some other reason? So, I guess what motivates you to choose someone to be an uplifted?
They are. So initially, it was their pets,
right?
And then I very quickly realized the kinds of animals that people decide are pets is very eclectic. I had to dial that in a bit.
Where are my tarantula people, Eddy?
Right, exactly. And like I'm looking at you, chinchilla guy. I've been hearing from you for years.
First of all, chinchillas are adorable. And
they are.
You could just put one in the Mice and Rats book and you'd be fine.
There are lots of things that are friend-shaped that you shouldn't be friends with.
Friend-shaped. Right. So what I really and the space I'm playing in are specifically pets that we have a cultural connection with rather than a personal connection with. So you can have individual pets if you want, but we have a relationship with dogs and cats as a culture. We have a relationship with mice and rats as a culture. We put them into our stories in a very specific way, and we have a connection to them that way. With the side point of the Badger tribes, they're kind of specifically an outlier. We don't have that connection with them, and that's the role they also metaphysically have with culture as well.
And also there's reasons for some of this that the behind the scenes people know.
Right, exactly. There are secret reasons.
Secrets.
So I mean, there are pets that we have cultural connections with. So I will do things like lizards and birds. Recently on the forums, there's an exception to that as well, is because fish do fit into that category, but I continue to struggle with how I could do that as a meaningful book, because I described in the forums as the Aquaman problem, right? It's that you have a really cool Aquaman comic that's all based underwater, and Aquaman can go into other people's books and guest star in their books and have a great time, but very few guest stars are dragged meaningfully into his underwater adventures.
Yeah.
So it's basically a whole new campaign book, which basically makes it a whole new game. And to be blunt, a game about fish is going to sell much less than a game about cat or dogs.
Which is also why our underwater dwellers and things like anima can also breathe air.
Right.
Because otherwise they are not fun for anybody if they're restricted to one place.
Right. And I do want to address to a comment in the chat, because this is kind of a frustrating comment, actually. I didn't say no important topics would be developed. What we said was, I have thoughts on them. I don't have anything right now. The Fearful Forest is a small topic that will probably not get a whole book devoted to just that.
Yeah.
So please relay correct information when you talk to other fans about what was actually said here, as opposed to making up something and then going off and telling other people.
Like Squeaks did just come out.
Right, we just released Squeaks.
And I am super excited about it. I have friends that are excited about it. My D&D friends, it's finally the thing that I can like get them to play, because my friend who, plays all the weird characters, I was talking about a sweet potato in our last panel, is really excited to play a mouse or a rat. And she's so excited.
Right.
And I am excited to allow her to play a mouse or a rat and to let her explore the underneath.
Right. And that's one of the things, that the pacing of these kinds of projects is that Rich talked in the What's Up panel about when things get backlogged. If we just shoot them all out, then they get lost in the noise. So we do have to kind of, carefully pace these things so people can enjoy the moment. So like if we really Squeaks on next week going, here's the next book, people are already forgetting about Squeaks. We want people to spend time to really enjoy and get excited about the thing that's actually out there.
Don't even have Squeaks in hardback yet.
Right. Well, we're still printing it, so
I want it.
And if I may,
sure,
we are just a moment over time, but we'll wrap things up after this and whatnot. But I do want to touch on just to state. I mean, the whole reason for this convention, the celebration, is 10 years of Onyx Path, and part of the reason that Onyx Path has been able to exist at that scale and continue to thrive after a decade is because sometimes the world shifts, and Onyx Path has always been very good matching that shift or compensating for that shift. Right now, with as have been discussed at length on some of the other panels, with the problems of shipping, printing, the various challenges that the industry is facing at the moment.
Yeah.
Being able to survive and thrive, part of that is making sure that we're not biting off more than we can chew in terms of announcements and production, and you know, making sure that there's a method to the madness for the most part.
Yeah, because like we announced a lot of stuff in like 2019, early 2020, and then everything happened.
Right. And then we wind up shipping 4 Kickstarters in the span of 2 weeks. You know, so for circumstances to be under control. So, you know, try to be. You know, I understand everybody's excited and loves things, but do try to be patient and try to you know, walk away with the knowledge that the game line it ain't going nowhere. There's more to be explored.
There's more to come. Absolutely.
But on that bright, shiny note, I suppose we should probably button this up. So, Dixie, do you have anything you would like to share with the class, promote, tell anyone where to find you, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I would add one more little anecdote about Pugmire, and that's I think I will always feel especially connected to it because it was one of the very early core books that I edited for you.
It was.
And I that was the first Kickstarter I felt connected to from Onyx Path. And seeing it launch and then go up to like 1,000% or whatever ridiculous thing it hit.
Wild.
I was at a house party in Connecticut part of that weekend, just like staring at my phone, like how is this number still going up? Like I worked on this. This is amazing, and I think that'll always be a part of it. To the point where when I was working on Monarchies, once again before I was in house, I took my laptop down to my childhood best friend's wedding so I could work on it at the Airbnb.
Oh wow.
So I was like at the Airbnb working until my friend showed up, and then I was like, okay, time to get ready and do things. I was like work on it some more. And so yeah, like I've always had a passion for these games, and that, you know, that just continues to shine, and I can't wait to see what happens next. And I'm always happy to be involved in any Pugmire project in any capacity, whether it's editing or writing or just playing it. You know, it's just fun. So yeah, and you can find me everywhere at Dixie Cyanide. Add bats. No. I will someday write the Dixie's favorite animal supplement for Canis Minor. I will write the bats, hedgehogs, penguin supplement that nobody asked for, but that everybody will love. Because hedgehogs will be able to curl into a ball and just shoot spines at people. That's my way about it.
I await it with bated breath. I look forward to it. And how about you, Eddy? Anything you'd like to tell them?
You can find me at Pugsteady. That's also my website name. And you can find me on the Onyx Path Discord, just sometimes answering questions and sometimes just posting cryptic comments.
That's fair. And you can find me, Travis Legge, pretty much anywhere online as it's spelled under my face. Except on Twitch where I'm Plastic Age Plays. I should fix that one of these days.
Probably.
But not today. We don't switch horses in the middle of the race, as I tried to tell Zoom earlier today. But I would like to thank you both for your time, for hanging out on this panel. I would like to thank everybody at home who's watching and hanging out. And please be back here in about 25 for the Chronicles of Darkness panel. And
which I'm actually not on.
You're not on,
because I left it up to the devs and freelancers, and also because I have COVID.
So I will echo a statement that you made earlier. If you're going to the Chronicles of Darkness panel, please do keep in mind that none of the folks that are on that panel have any decision-making capabilities regarding the future of the line. So ask them nice questions about what they've worked on and things along those lines. But
like Hunter and Changeling and Deviant and Mummy, all the new games.
The 3 core books that have come out in the last 2 or 3 months. So let them breathe. And we will see you over there at that panel at 10 Eastern. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you soon.
Goodbye.